back, RotoGrinders, to the NFL Pick 6 Super Wild Card Weekend Show. You thought you were done with us after 18 weeks? Nope. We're running 2 more shows. We're going to kick it off with the Super Wild Card Weekend Show, and then next weekend as well to close out the season, as is usual. Bringing back Rich Hribar, John Daigle. Rich, of course, from Sharp Football Analysis. John Daigle from NBC Sports and a Good Football Show podcast. Daigle, the longest season has ended. The longest regular season has ended, and now we're on to the playoffs. We excited?
It was nearly the longest game possible as well to end the season until the Raiders kicked that field goal with just a couple seconds remaining. But happy that we're done with regular season football. Now every game, every team matters, and some interesting matchups for this weekend as well, since a lot of these teams we've already seen play each other, but they were all in interesting spots, oddly enough, the first time they played each other, or in some cases the first couple of times they played each other. So a lot we'll talk about throughout the show.
John, you brought it up. Per the rules of Twitter, per the rules of just being a person who watches football, you have to put out your take as far as the timeout. Like, you're obligated. Well, you got to have a hot take as far as the timeout for the Chargers, right?
It was process and results, in my opinion. They called the timeout, which I thought was the incorrect decision. But then also, all you got to do is not let Josh Jacobs run for 12 yards in the next carry. And then that happened. So stop that, and it doesn't matter anyways. But that was the one bugaboo the Chargers could not handle. Out of their bye, playing a league high rate of stacked boxes, they were stopping the run. And then we just went full circle, and it came back to haunt them in their last 2 games where they just couldn't stop any running back. So now they're out of the picture, and instead we get a rematch between the Raiders and Bengals, which we'll discuss.
I'm bummed, man. I root for the Chargers as I don't have a favorite team, but I find them enjoyable. I like the powder blues. Eckler seems like a fun guy.
Are you sure you didn't want Herbert over Roethlisberger? Rather watch Roethlisberger play?
I've been done with Ben for so long. I do not even want to talk about that game, let alone roster him or watch him.
It's going to be a quick one. Don't worry.
Yeah, Rich. By all means, you have any general thoughts as far as the playoffs getting kicked off here? Any thoughts as far as last week? Every once in a while we look back, but this is the second part of the season. Every single game matters, obviously. Short slates, which we'll talk about as well. But what do you have for us?
Yeah, I was bummed too that Herbert didn't get in, especially, man. I mean, that dude just throws lays beams, man. I mean, those 2 throws he had in the fourth quarter were just absolutely ridiculous. The touchdown to Mike Williams, I mean, from the QB angle, is just like, there was no place, like, how many quarterbacks can get the ball there that fast in just a nanosecond? He reminds me, it very much feels like, he's just like modern John Elway in like a sense. He's athletic. He's just got like an absolute cannon. I'm excited to see more of them. Everything went wrong for the Chargers in that game. I mean, you have the Foster Moreau fumble go out at the 1-yard line to start the game instead of in the end zone. You have Andre Roberts muff punt. You go for the 4th down and don't get it. You have the pass interference. You get up a draw on 3rd and 23. When's the last time we saw a 3rd and 20 draw successfully work in the NFL for a first down? Everything just snowballed on the Chargers. They couldn't get out of the hole. They missed a field goal in the 3rd quarter. That's how it happens. And, credit to the Raiders. The Raiders actually played a game that I didn't think that they were capable of. I thought if that game got in the 30s, like, the Raiders couldn't get there, and they did, and they won it. We get to see them again, and we get to see Ben again as a byproduct of it all. Pretty bummed about the Steelers. The Steelers, I think, unequivocally are the worst playoff team probably in the last decade. They're the largest wild card underdogs in NFL history. The Houston Texans led for more offensive snaps this season than the Pittsburgh Steelers. I mean, we'll get to that game when we get there. But,
last time we talked about this, it's shades of the Seattle Saints game with Marshawn Lynch carrying the Seahawks over New Orleans in the Superdome. Mm-hmm. But then again, I dare you to see that happen. Like, there's no, we'll get to the game. We'll get to the game.
Yeah,
I can't imagine it.
But I do think that, the playoffs this year, we were talking a little bit about just, kind of like how we're approaching like our playoff pools. And it's so unique this year because of just, you hate to just air quotes use parity, but, it's been every team's had hiccups this season, really. So, I mean, it is kind of wide open this year, and the playoffs hopefully are going to be indicative of what we got in the regular season where, hey, man, maybe someone no-shows week 1. There are some upsets and things can happen. I don't know if any of us will be picking the Steelers to be that team, but this feels like a lot of these games are pretty wide open the opening week.
Yeah, just to kind of set the stage, we're recording this on a Wednesday night. Some of y'all listen to us live. Many of y'all listen to us, on repeat there, on Thursday or Friday, whatever, what have you. But just understand, we understand 6-game slates. We're going to break down. We're breaking our format. We should have mentioned that. It is the Pick Six show after all. We're going to break down every single game individually. That's how we're going to do it. We understand in the context of DFS, there are whatever slate you want, it's available. It's out there. The sites have it for you. If you want all 6 games, that's a thing. If you want showdown slates, for sure. Every single one of those showdown style, you can have at it that way as well. And then there's a Saturday slate, the 2-gamer, and then Sunday slate, 3-gamer. And then there's 5-game slate with the cutting off the Monday game. So yeah, we just figure we're going to break it down game by game. We'll exaggerate if there's a play we especially like and say, well, this is maybe the best running back of the entire weekend, yada, yada. But that's how we're going to do it. That's how we're going to go down with the game by game theory. That, hey, it's the Pick Six show. We got to, that's the way we got to run it down. All right. Vegas Bengals. John, you didn't have to pick this week. That's right. That's always your task. You have to isolate the 3 games, and it's a lot of pressure. It's just all 6 of them.
Devin sent the default email citing, here's the link. What games are we talking about? And then my initial reaction too was like, well, it's 6. Like, why don't we just do every game? And then Reeves was the one to step in very quickly and say, yep, that's what it is. Every single game this week.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. Raiders, Cincinnati, 49ers, the total. Cincinnati is a 5.5 point favorite here. I'll throw it to you, John. Pick an offense. Which offense do you want to start with? Do you want to talk about the Bengals? You want to talk about the Raiders? Who do you prefer?
We can start with the Bengals because this is one of those repeat matchups from earlier this year. I even remember talking about this game in the season with y'all because we mentioned Burrow's stats against the blitz, and at the time the Raiders were blitzing heavily. Also Burrow's stats against cover 3, and as we know, Gus Bradley only runs cover 3 essentially with that defense. But in this game, the Bengals responded differently in having 32 running back carries to 29 passes overall. The Raiders actually blitzed the fewest of any team in the league this week, the last time they played the Bengals. Still ended up with a top 10 pressure rate on Burrow, but nonetheless, Burrow just finished with 140 yards and a touchdown as the Bengals leaned on more of a run-heavy attack. You also see the box score, and you see 32-13 in the final. But remember, this game was actually 16-13 midway through the third quarter. It took a couple Joe Mixon breakout runs in order to get things going. And so I think recency bias has caused people to think that, okay, it was a changing of the guard, like a changing in thought process for Zach Taylor these past 2 games. Like he's been slow playing it as an intelligent play caller and sending Burrow out and then having them throw heavily against the Ravens. We talked about a rivalry game, and the Chiefs that pretty much have forced Burrow to throw through the air since the Chiefs took an early lead. But overall, I don't know if that's the case at all. So when we look at this game, for me, it actually starts in wildcard DFS slates with Joe Mixon.
You agree with that, Rich?
Yeah, I think there's a pretty good signal with Mixon here. One, he's in a spot where you attach yourself to running backs, right? You've got a home team with a high team total that's a favorite, facing a team that is not good objectively against the run at any point this season. I mean, the Raiders have been beaten up by running backs all season. They've allowed 23 touchdowns to opposing running backs. That's 30th in the NFL. They're 28th in receiving points allowed to running backs. They're 25th in rushing points allowed to running backs. Seems like a pretty good spot to just kind of have the Bengals, really are able to run the football with game script, not really be pressed to kind of be aggressive here. Even if they start out aggressive, game script could just turn itself into kind of them, using a lot of Joe Mixon, especially because like we saw against the Chiefs, they started aggressive, but then they also were down 28-14 and stay aggressive. And then when you have Jamar Chase just going absolutely bonkers, that kind of leans itself into it. So I do think that they will kind of get back to Joe Mixon heavily. The question is always with Joe Mixon is, are they going to throw him the football this week? This is what we do. This is how we live with Joe Mixon every week. He had 14 targets the final 2 games of the season. But as we also know, I mean, he had just 7 games where he caught 2 more passes in the regular season too. And that's kind of dictated how much he scores in fantasy football. In those games, he averaged 26.3 PPR points per game. And in the other games, just 11.6 PPR points per game. So what will we get from the Bengals this week? Will they throw him the football or not? He wasn't targeted in the first game, even though he stacked a bunch of yardage. But we still want that to be kind of sticky. We don't want to just bank on him getting 2 or 3 rushing touchdowns. We want him to have a high floor as well.
Yeah, that's what I see here. 30 carries against Vegas, but no catches and no targets. Now, I don't know. Do you think that was just sort of a variance, randomness, whatever happened? I don't know what happened that week specifically. Or you think it was something the way Cincinnati was being defended against by Vegas as far as, trying to subdue dump offs to Mixon? or who knows?
No, I mean, because we've seen that come and go with Mixon all year. It's like, it'd be different. It's you just go down his game log. You'll see him have 5 targets or 6 catches, and then he'll go 3 or 4 games with no catches. And then it just kind of pops up. So it's been kind of no rhyme or reason. I've chased it a couple times with matchups, and it's just there's really no clear signal. But if you do follow like his absolute high scoring fantasy games, I mean, this was the only game where he had fewer than 2 catches that he was an RB1 on the season, and he got in the box twice. So we don't want to just be relying on him getting multiple touchdowns. We want those to be icing on the cake. That's how you get to have like those 30-point PPR games. So we do want him to throw him the football.
Speaking of rhyme or reason and a signal, what about the Bengals receiver, especially when you consider the asking price, Chase, Higgins, Boyd, the way the Raiders defend? Is there one that looks more appealing than the other, or it's just kind of like we're throwing darts here?
Well, I mean, the way the Raiders play defense, obviously, like John said, I mean, they've played cover 3, 66% of their snaps. The next highest team is at, in the 45% range. So they're just playing cover 3 at a higher rate than anyone in the league. They don't give up big plays. They're 3rd in the NFL in completion rate allowed on throws 15 yards or further downfield. Jamar Chase was 2nd in the NFL in fantasy points scored on those targets, behind just Tyler Lockett this season. 8 of his touchdowns came on those targets, which led the entire NFL. And when these first teams played the first time, I mean, he just caught 3 passes. He got a touchdown on an end zone target, but didn't have a huge game. The Raiders are also 6th in just touchdown rate allowed to opposing wide receivers anyways. They're 6th in yards per target. They're just predicated on not giving up the big play. And that's how Jamar Chase has generated his fantasy points consistently the entire season. That doesn't mean like he can't get over and make a big play against the Raiders. No, he's good enough to do it against anybody. But the Raiders have been predicated on kind of taking away Jamar Chase's one like true spade in fantasy circles kind of this season. But we had T. Higgins pop up with a foot injury today and didn't practice. We'll have to kind of follow that the rest of the week. That could open up some more targets for like Tyler Boyd, especially against a heavy zone-based team. I mean, we saw Tyler Boyd. He didn't have really any yards the first time these teams played, but he did have 8 targets. So he's definitely a low ceiling play, but he's a guy that could get more targets just by structure of the defense, funneling things underneath and a lot of zone coverage.
What about Azoma?
I mean, maybe. he does have 15% or more of the targets in each of the past 5 games. There's been really no ceiling there. And the one unique thing about this wild card slate is really all the good tight ends are on it. They're playing, except for Mark Andrews. Like everyone, all the high scoring tight ends and like points per game this year are on the slate.
It's the postseason. Like even if you go down a peg and you want to go to like Dalton Schultz or Dallas Goedert, we know their ceilings are still significantly higher for only like a K more on DraftKings. So yeah, I mean, we literally brought everyone to the table at tight end.
Mm-hmm.
John, you have a favorite receiver as far as Cincinnati, or it's just, does anybody really stand out for you, or not necessarily?
Not necessarily. Like Rich said, it was Boyd who led the team, and we believe because it was that zone coverage where he can just get comfortable in the middle of. The last time these two teams played with a 27.5% target share. But again, we're chasing a ceiling here. And so it'd probably be Higgins over Chase for me, given all the stats that Reeves cited. But overall, yeah, I think Boyd, like if he led the team in targets or catches again, it would not be shocking. It's just a matter of what does that produce is the question we're asking.
Anything else as far as Cincinnati? Like Joe Burrow, Joe Burrow is going to be facing, again, depending on what you're playing on, if you're playing the 2-game slate versus Carr on the other side, and Mac Jones and Josh Allen, we'll talk about them soon enough, and a game that we're expecting to be super, super cold there in Buffalo. Where do you have Joe Burrow here on this slate? Is when you consider stackability partners and all that as well, is Burrow one of your favorites quarterbacks here, John, or somewhere in the middle? I don't think it's something you're ignoring, I assume.
Not ignoring, but the 2-game slate is just tricky because we'll talk about when we get to the Patriots Bills. And that I wonder how many people will get off. Josh Allen will clearly be the highest rostered. But how many people will get off for Joe Burrow? Because if they get off Josh Allen, that means they are getting on to Joe Burrow. And I don't want to be the one that plays like Mac Jones or Derek Carr. But maybe like I do that just to spend up elsewhere. So I'm still trying to figure out, admittedly, quarterback on a Wednesday for like the 2-game slate where there are literally only 2 options.
Yeah, and that's why maybe the 5-game slate or the 6-game slate will be friendlier as well.
You probably just suck it up and take Josh Allen's rushing yards as the high floor play here, since we know Burrow won't, not that he can't, but he won't offer that. And then you get contrarian elsewhere.
Rich, feel free to answer the same question and jump on over to Derek Carr on the other side of this Raiders game. But is it true? Is it a thing? I've heard rumblings. I've heard speculation that he's not good in the cold. Do you have a big enough sample size for that? Is there legitimacy to that thought process?
Who's that?
Derek Carr. Have you heard this before?
No, I didn't really pull up. I mean, I just looked at Derek. I don't need to really go a bridge too far. Like Derek Carr just hasn't been good since the bye. I don't need to go like under the hood and like come up with more reasons to not like Derek Carr. He just hasn't played really good in terms of fantasy football stance since they've had the bye. So it's like really hard. I mean, he had to close the season. He had 2 QB1 scoring weeks over his final 8 games. He averaged 7 yards per pass attempt. He had 8 games with 1 or fewer touchdown passes. Even last week with the Raiders scoring 30, he didn't do anything in that game. The completion rate was way down. Just not really a lot to love. When these teams played earlier in the season, like the Bengals pressured Derek Carr on 40% of his dropbacks in that game. They have 2 of the worst 5 offensive linemen in terms of pressure rate allowed per passing snap in the NFL on their offensive line. It's kind of just a hard spot to really kind of gravitate saying like Derek Carr has a high ceiling. And we did see them pop twice on a similar slate like this, once on Thanksgiving, and then they have the high point total on Sunday night. But I mean, this is a team that since their bye, they scored a touchdown in just 16.5% of their offensive possessions. The only teams worse than that over that span were the Panthers, the Texans, the Falcons, the Jaguars, and the Giants. Like this offense hasn't been good. They are last in the NFL, or they're 26th in the NFL in red zone conversion rate. They have a 37.4 conversion rate on third down. That's 22nd in the NFL. That's the worst of all playoff teams. It's just kind of hard to kind of draw a bridge there. I mean, these are teams that backed in the postseason. I understand that it's any given Sunday and these things happen, but like objectively, there's just not a lot to love in terms of upside, fantasy upside that like this offense offers, and then the one we'll talk about in the other AFC game on Sunday night. And
like, speaking of not looking under the hood, like you would just look at their schedule and say that, like, yeah, they got burned by Mahomes, but after that, they backed into the postseason because they played Nick Mullins, Drew Lock, Carson Wentz, and then that Herbert game that went to overtime in the end. So it's just like they came up running hot on schedule at the end of the year as well.
I'm hearing you guys correctly. Y'all want to lay the 5.5. Is that what I'm hearing? I mean, this is not a game show necessarily.
I don't trust Zach Taylor either. So I kind of like Mixon. I also took the Raiders on Monday, admittedly. It was 6.5 though. It was 6.5.
Okay. So can Darren Waller kind of turn that around, Rich? Can he be he's obviously an upgrade over, Foster Moreau. We saw him, come back last game, obviously. A lot of targets, not a lot of offense there out of him, but in theory there's still some talent there. I presume he's mostly fine. I'm not really sure what he's saying is, he's giving it a go, gutting it out, whatever it is. When he's playing, he's on the field. Can he at least make them a little bit better? Or it's just
of course. Yeah. I mean, he's the guy that's probably the most intriguing. We can talk about him and Renfro, and if Daigle wants to talk about Zay Jones, he can. No. But Waller, the usage was there. I mean, he ran a pass route on 92.5% of the team dropbacks. He had the 9 targets. The production wasn't there what he liked, but we'll take the usage and take that as a sign of, all right, he's healthy enough to be on the field that much. We can kind of chase him in a game on a short slate, especially where you talk about the late game. You've got 2 defenses that have been amazing against tight ends, and the passing volume might not be there in that game anyways. And then Waller himself had a season high, 116 yards when these teams played earlier in the season. The Bengals have been kind of touched up by tight ends and really beat up over the middle of the field the entire season. 26th in catch rate to those tight ends, 27th in yards per target, 22nd in touchdown rate. So yeah, Waller is definitely probably the one piece that's probably the most intriguing. Renfro is still getting into the end zone, but the targets haven't really been there. It's not just because Waller's back. It's that Zay Jones is starting to get like 8 targets a game. That's really kind of cut in there. So Renfro's actually gone the other way from his archetype. He's actually been kind of more of a touchdown dependent scorer to close the season. So that's kind of pretty interesting. The Bengals are worse, like in terms of guarding, like I said, the middle of the field and interior receivers. They're 23rd in points allowed to opposing slot receivers. That didn't necessarily help Renfro the first time these teams played. But that is where you want to attack the Bengals, is the middle of the field.
But even in averaging, nearly 9 targets per game over the last month, Zay Jones hasn't scored a touchdown since week 1, and he's gone over 100 yards. Well, no, he's actually gone over 70 yards just once all year. So it's like not It's like poor man's Tyler Boyd. We were struggling to get to Tyler Boyd. Now imagine getting to Zay Jones.
Was Deshaun Jackson on the field last game, or he just wasn't efficient? He was exercising, as Rich would say, or I don't have the.
We got that cowboy slant out of him, and that's all we needed. We never needed to see him again after that.
I'm just thinking about like large field stuff. Like D-Jack is a guy that can, get there in one play, 70-yard touchdown. At least historically, I don't know if he still can be that guy.
His role hasn't really increased. Even this past game, he was only on the field for 8 routes overall. And so, I'm trying to think of a player, because Marcus Valdes-Scantling even went to a full-time player. It's just, you're going to get very, very, very limited usage out of him since they are entrusting Zay Jones with that role as their number 2 receiver.
3-1 on DK, 4-9 on FanDuel. If he's not in the field, what's the point? But I'm just
trying
to think
of a way to be
different.
If you want to throw him in on DraftKings, I imagine he's actually really popular since everyone's going to take the points. You can't play him on FanDuel. You just can't.
Rich, anything else you want to add as far as D-Jax or the receivers? I feel like we got to talk about Josh Jacobs. Is he just he's the guy? They're going to sprinkle in Richard, basically, some third down stuff, but presumably if the Raiders are down, if they're down like 10 or so in the fourth quarter, 8 minutes to go, is it Jacobs back there or is it Richard?
Probably still more Jacobs. It's kind of been like the end of the season. They've just kind of swerved into letting him have an extended role. He's got 19.7 touches per game over his past 10 games, 3 in a row with 20 plus. The Bengals have been pretty good against the run this season. They will give up some rushing touchdowns. He got kind of game scripted out in that game, even though it was kind of a closer game for 3 quarters, like Daigle said, but only 9 carries. He did have 7 targets. Jacobs, at least it's been saving his floor, the targets he's getting, but he's not doing anything with the targets. Like he's getting the catches. So if you're in a full PPR league, like that helps you and it saved his floor, but like he hasn't been getting a lot of like high ceiling weeks because of it. Like we talked about with Mixon, right? Like when you look at Mixon's targets, when they do throw to him, he's got a lot of like really good receiving games. Josh Jacobs doesn't. He's got a bunch of just hollow catches, like no kind of yardage. The Bengals haven't. They've allowed 100-yard rusher since the Week 10 bye, and it was Dearness Johnson last week in a throwaway game where nobody really played for them. They're getting all their guys back off of COVID. It's just not a spot, and he's in a spot as a road dog, which we just don't really like, inherently. So he's probably not a guy I'm going to be on, but like obviously pass interference in the end zone, anything like knocking the door, he's going to be the guy getting those touches. So you can always run into like the luck box touchdown.
John, you got anything else as far as Jacobs? Anything else as far as this game, or shall we move on?
No, Jacobs and Waller are probably as far as I'll get for the Raiders side.
All right, New England, Buffalo, the second game it's played on Saturday night. 44 is the total. Buffalo is a 4-point favorite. We talked about how this game is expected to be super, super cold. What were you saying before the show, John? A Wednesday night, so it's weather. It's only so much you can get. But what negative degrees projection?
No,
feels like
no wind, no snow, but supposed to feel like -3.
Okay, so there's no winds. That means the Patriots, in theory, are going to throw the ball at least more than 3 times, John?
Maybe,
yeah.
They don't want to, theoretically. Like, they would love to just run it 1,000 times and just get out of town. But, I mean, everybody else knows that, too, and nobody's playing Mac Jones. But, whatever. I understand why they're not. And talk about Josh Allen. We kind of already touched on it already. And, like, even if he's not passing, slinging it around a ton, he's got the wheels, he's got the legs to make it happen as well. At the goal line, he can run it in also. But, John, what do you have for me as far as Josh Allen? How much you're prioritizing this week? Of course, ideally, you prefer like he was in a dome against a rough defense and a shootout, but that's not the scenario. But he can still get there, obviously.
I'm just worried about the Bills overall because it's pretty much the worst draw they could have had, especially given Josh Allen's career splits with completing 57% of his passes to the Patriots. Now, they were encouragingly more aggressive in their last matchup against New England before that Chargers-Raiders game, going for it the most times on 4th down of any offense, and they were 3 or 4 on fourth down. My only concern here is that even in finishing top 3 in 3rd down conversion rate, and in that game, they were 6 of 12 on 3rd down as well. Like Patriots finished the year top 10 in 3rd down conversion rate. And in that game, they were 1 for 10. Like they weren't moving the chains at all. Even though Damian Harris, even Mac Jones, they had success on the ground in both contests against them. And so given the weather, given the matchup, especially common foes, I just think it's not a terrific game really to get on Buffalo's side, especially if you're playing like the 5-game slates across the entire weekend.
Rich, thoughts there?
Yeah, it's probably the worst spot they could have drawn. You know, we were kind of joking before the game. It's like Belichick or the Patriots. They have this magic because when you look at like the Patriots, like up and down, like anytime they've played like a functional offense in like outside of the Bills like bad weather game, and the Buccaneers. Remember that game was played on Sunday night, and like the rain and cold too. They've given up points. I mean, they've given up points. Like this defense has been kind of schedule driven. And we saw that when they played the Bills in like a kind of neutral, conditions when they played 3 weeks ago. They gave up, 33 points last week. They gave 27 points to the Colts. They gave 35 points to the Cowboys. They gave up 28 points to the Saints earlier in the year. And then you just have like a gaggle of them just beating up like terrible offenses in the middle of the season. So, I mean, this defense has been a little bit of kind of a fugazi over the course of the season. So once again, this plays into their hands. They've had a couple little bit of a mini COVID outbreak in the defensive backfield. So keep eyes on that throughout the week. Jalen Mills just went on today. So have to keep tabs on that. But if you can't throw the ball, I mean, what are you going to do? And that's kind of what we are. We're on weather watch throughout the course of this game. And maybe the sample is just small enough to where if there's no wind, it doesn't matter because Josh Allen can run, and they swerved into him running the last 5 games. He's got double-digit rushing attempts in 3 of those 5 games, over 10 rushing fantasy points per game over that span. So we'll see him probably run a good amount too. But we've got this 3-game sample this year with terrible weather. We obviously have the wind game, which everyone remembers, the rain game against the Colts, and then the snow game against the Falcons a couple weeks ago. And Josh Allen threw for fewer than 6 yards per pass attempt in all 3 of those games. The week 17 game against the Falcons was the coldest weather game he's played in his career, and it was 26 degrees, which is like the tropics compared to negative degrees, at 8:00 at night in Buffalo. Josh Allen's only played 4 career games below freezing temperatures, and in those games he's thrown for 193 or fewer yards in all 4. He has a 55% completion rate. He's thrown 4 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. I mean, this team is built to play like in a dome and in like optimal conditions. And this is another factor that can slow them down, to go along with whatever, Belichick's going to scheme up for the 3rd time that these teams are going to play. But on paper, I mean, the Bills are a way better team than the Patriots. Like it's not even close. So, I mean, it's just one of these things that we're going to factor in and see how much of it plays in because we don't really know what kind of variable it's going to be. Maybe they come out and shred. There's no wind. We don't know. But if you look at like the history of games played in cold weather, even regardless of wind, it's not good, especially in the postseason. We were kind of talking about it before the show. I mean, how much these games go under. 9 games in the playoffs played since the merger in single-digit weather. The average combined point totals in that game is 36.5 combined points in those games. The most recent one that people remember is the 2016 game. The 2015 season when Seattle played Minnesota in the game where they were playing in the College Stadium at the time. And I forget who their kicker was at the time that missed that short field goal and they lose the game at the end of it. But that game was 10-9. It was an absolute travesty. So yeah, it's kind of just a thing we don't know going into Saturday night. We don't know how much of an impact it's going to have.
But we do know that, if there is weather, we've seen the Bills lean on Devin Singletary, even their last 2 games. And remember, these last 2 games are important because they were trying to make it to the playoffs and then clinch a home field game. And Devin Singletary, even this past week, scored both of his touchdowns in the last 8:30. They've been taking the ball out of Josh Allen's hands late in the 4th quarter and just running it instead to make sure no mistakes are committed down the stretch. Singletary, of course, who has at least 21 touches in 3 of his last 4 games. And so, we're talking about DFS here, but even in playoff only formats, which are very popular right now, playoff only best ball as well, I do like Josh Allen, like pivots to Devin Singletary. I like sneaking in Patriots defense and Damian Harris into those leagues because how the world was watching the Colts Jags game, since that game decided so much. Like both the Patriots and Bills have good walks throughout the postseason for whomever escapes this game. Like the Patriots would then take on the Titans, and then I guess the Chiefs, if we're assuming they win the divisional round, whereas the Bills would then get the Chiefs in the 2nd round and then move on to whomever comes on between the Bengals and Raiders. So overall, this is a terrible matchup, and whoever wins this game could very well be representing the AFC.
By the way, Blair Walsh, that was the kicker
Blair Walsh
from Minnesota. Yeah. I think the Ohio State kicker before that. But also, you mentioned the Colts. Like, who says no? Like, the Colts should trade their dome for Buffalo's outdoors. Like, those teams would fit perfectly playing in the other, right? Wouldn't that make a lot of sense the way they run their offenses? I don't know. It's probably difficult to make that trade for sure. But can you play? Does this sound ridiculous? Again, I'm trying to be a little bit goofy, a little bit different, especially if you're playing, depending on what slate you are. Can you play Josh Allen naked? Like, is that something you could do? Like, you don't have to do it. Or maybe pair him with Singleton and get all the rushing touchdowns. He can dump it off to Singleton as well, I guess. Or am I just thinking some ridiculous things here, Rich? Is that an absurd thought?
No, I mean, definitely on the Saturday only slate, we talked about the first game too, and how Burrow performed the first game against the Raiders and how they're just predicated on not giving up a lot of production. Because remember, even in Sunday night, it took Herbert throwing 30 passes in the fourth quarter to get there, right? Like on this 4-game slate, I mean, it's like just Josh Allen's legs are enough to carry enough weight to see some upside there. Where he can get there on his own and offer 2 rushing touchdowns. I mean, we talked about that week 17 game against the Falcons. He was awful throwing the football in that game, but still had 20 fantasy points because he's the power back. He has the 2 rushing touchdowns in that game. So, I mean, yeah, that scenario still exists as well. That's the one thing I keep circling back to is just how much can they still do because they didn't really run Josh Allen in the first game like they've been down the stretch. And like, how much is that going to be a part of the game plan if like weather is that much of an impact like it was the first time they played? Because even the first time they played, they lost 14-10 and they went 1 for 4 in the red zone in that game. Like the Patriots are still going like if they think they're going to trot out and throw the ball 3 times again and just hope they get another 65-yard touchdown run. I mean, that's not an optimal game plan. Like the Patriots are going to have to score offensive points in this game, even if it's a lower scoring game. So, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out because this Patriots team has kind of floundered offensively the final month in the season, and Mac Jones hasn't played well at all against any team that has like a respectable pressure rate defensively on any point in the season. I mean, you look at the games he's played against teams in the top 10 in pressure rate. He's played 7 games, and in those games, those teams have pressured him on a third of his dropbacks, and he's completed 48% of his passes for 5.3 yards per pass attempt. Bills are number 1 in the NFL in pressure rate. They obviously got to him the last time these teams played when they played in New England, and Mac Jones was kind of exposed a little bit, and he was exposed the week before against the Colts. He did not play well against the Dolphins last week. Again, another team that puts a lot of pressure on the quarterback. So, I mean, if the Patriots have to drop back and throw in this game, I mean, that's the least optimal like way they can play offense in this game.
If I'm going to force you to pick a pass catcher for the Patriots, Myers, Aguilar, Bourne, Harry, one of the tight ends, Smith or Henry, like who would be, probably none of them look great, but if you got to pick one, who do you think it would be? I
mean, you just have to default Myers. He has 51 more targets than the next closest guy on the team.
Yeah.
Bourne had picked up steam like mid-year, but since he returned from the COVID list, he's been lacking some pop.
By the way, Josh Allen played college at Wyoming, right? So he's used to, I haven't been to Wyoming, but my understanding, it's a bit rough around those parts, is it not? I think, as far as the weather?
It's very cold. He did have that quote that's circulating now that said his main concern is keeping his toes warm because since he has poor circulation, they tend to go numb whenever it's too cold. And hey, buddy, it's going to be -3, so get out there. Good luck.
Mine was always my fingers. Like when we played in the cold, like mine was always if I lost my fingers, like I was done. Like I just focused on like keeping my hands as warm as possible. I used to wear surgeon gloves under my wide receiver gloves because it would just like keep the heat in. That was a trick I found that really worked really well. But my fingers were the most important thing. I had to keep my hands warm.
I'm learning so much. I didn't know you played. I didn't know you were a receiver. Who would give me your comp if I were to go to playerprofile.com and I type in
like
Rich Hribar.
Darren Cheverini. Like
I don't know who that is. It's like your high school.
Brian Brennan.
Who are these guys?
Exactly.
There's a reason. Yeah, there's a reason you haven't heard of them.
All right. So your wide receiver of choice on the Buffalo side, John, what do you have for us? And again, of course, you want it to be Diggs. Is that a smart spend up? If you're running 150, you're running 100 lineups, of course, you're playing some Diggs. Like there's no reason not to play some Diggs. Sanders expected back this week. We'll see on that. Davis, Beasley as well. You got another tight end that's like, competent, that's worth a look, and Knox. Do you have a preference amongst this group?
It's just tough because we're waiting on Emmanuel Sanders, and then you sort of have to figure out what they're going to do with him back, since we know Gabriel Davis will be on the field essentially as a full-time player if Sanders is out. But now practicing in full on Tuesday and Wednesday. Last time we saw Sanders prior to injury, he actually led the team in routes run, even more than Stephon Diggs. And it's not like he's doing anything with those targets at this stage of his career, late into the year. And so what I think will happen, since we've already seen Isaiah McKenzie lead the team in targets, then move back to the bench the moment Cole Beasley and Gabriel Davis were off the COVID list, I genuinely think Gabriel Davis just goes back to the bench, and we see full-time Emmanuel Sanders, which in my opinion is significantly less impactful than having Davis out there full-time. And so Diggs is fine, but we've also seen Diggs, pretty much just the regression we've talked about from last year carry over and lacking the ceiling. He's still getting the targets. Even in his last 8 games, he's averaged nearly 10 targets per game, but he hasn't exceeded 90 yards in any of those performances. And so you're basically just counting on touchdowns right now, since he hasn't been really a ceiling player since he spoiled us with his ceilings last year. And so I don't think you necessarily have to have him. Maybe if you want to take that reception floor with the upside in a 2-game slate, totally fine. But I don't think he's someone you necessarily have to have in like a 5-game slate.
Rich, same question?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, you're obviously going to look at Diggs first just because of the targets and, the way the Patriots play defense. I mean, both times they played him, the first time they played man coverage, 42% of snaps. That was the 3rd highest in the NFL that week. In the second matchup, they played 41.2% of the time. Man coverage was the 4th highest rate in the NFL. And when you just look at the splits of the Buffalo offense versus man versus zone, Diggs has 30% of the team targets against man as opposed to 23% against zone. So, I mean, and he's a target on 25 or 30% of his routes too, as well against man, as opposed to 23% of his routes against zone. So when they do see man, when Josh Allen sees man, he wants to go to Diggs. So if the Patriots are going to put them in that spot, we know the targets are going to get there. But like Daigle said, this hasn't been a high ceiling player. He's really gotten over on just all the end zone targets. I mean, he leads the NFL in end zone targets. So I mean, it's tough. I mean, the Bills have spread everything out. Like as the season's gone on, we've seen Gabe Davis get involved. Dawson Knox has obviously been involved in the red zone all year, and now Devin Singletary is involved in the offense again as another piece. So it's an offense that's giving the ball to more players than it was, last year when it was largely a Diggs show.
And Reeves mentioned Jalen Mills on the COVID list earlier. Like, he's their second best man quarter. He's the man they put across the field from JC Jackson and let him just go out there. So it's kind of a wait and see approach, honestly, right now.
Lastly, what do we do with the running backs as far as New England? Kind of sort of a 3-headed monster to some degree. Harris has been dealing with that hamstring. I assume he's going to be the guy. Stevenson had a concussion last week. I assume he's going to be fine. Bolden, kind of the catch me up 3rd down guy. Rich, is there anything they get excited about? Ideally, if New England had their druthers, they would probably just hammer Harris and Stevenson a ton. Is that something they can execute? Yeah,
I mean, this game is going to be largely how does this game start, right? Like, do the Patriots play ahead or are they playing behind? Like, this is it's going to dictate so much. Because we've seen the Bills, they want to play that base nickel defense. That's what they want to live in. And you can run on them if they're in that. If they want to play with the lead and make you come out of the run. We know that the Patriots aren't going to do that. In the second matchup, when they were losing throughout, they stayed with the run. And Damian Harris you got over it, the 3-touchdown game. Obviously he's a guy that we need to get into the end zone, but he has scored in 10 of his past 11 games. So like if the Patriots do score a touchdown, he's the guy that has the most touchdown equity in the offense. He did catch 4 passes last week. It was a season high, but like he still had 18 catches all season. I don't think we can really count on those. Buffalo has been their second in the NFL in receiving points allowed to running backs anyways. That's what makes Bolden not appealing and why he didn't even get over when the game script led to he would have been the signal that he would have done well in the second matchup. But the Bills don't give up any production through the air to running backs. Stevenson hasn't really done anything in a game that Harris has played in full, like really at all, unless it was garbage time against the Jaguars. He's just not getting enough touches in the base offense. So it would be Harris as the guy.
And we haven't seen them play full games together because they've both been in and out of the lineup since week 12. Like, they both have been banged up at random times. Even last week, Stevenson suffered a head injury in the first half, came back in the third quarter. He's not on the injury report at all, but he couldn't play through it. Like, they got a couple more snaps in the third quarter and it took him off the field. Whereas in week 11 and 12, when they played together, they had just 21 carries apiece, literally split their workload down the middle. So I do like Harris a lot, given the game script we've talked about, but I'm also even with fewer touches, what we're projecting, I'm still not opposed to playing both because the rules are out the window in a 2-game slate. And so I think I just like picking that game script, and then maybe you run back naked Josh Allen, hoping that he's the one who brings them back.
That is the Saturday 2-game slate. Going to talk about the Sunday 3-gamer in a second, and the Monday night game as well. Before we move on beyond that, we want to talk about our sponsor, Jock Market. Appreciate y'all sponsoring us all season long. Jock Market, stop throwing your money away. It's time to check out Jock Market, the app where daily fantasy becomes a stock exchange. You buy and sell shares of players in real time for real money. Download now for a 100% deposit match up to $50 using the promo code Grinders. That's GRINDERS. Now get this. If you do not turn a profit this week, Jock Market, they're going to cover your losses in your very first event. Download Jock Market in the app or Play stores or check out jockmarket.com. That's JOCKMKT.com. Again, use the promo code Grinders, 100% deposit match up to $50 on your first deposit. First game on Sunday, Philadelphia at Tampa, 46 is the total. 86 will be a lot of fun. It's like arena football. Total in this game is 46. Tampa is an 8.5-point favorite. They are likely expected to get Lenny Fournette back. Ronald Jones unlikely to play. Shaq Barrett and JPP also optimistic they're going to get them back as well. John, pretty big favorite here as far as the Tampa Bay side. Of course, Tom Brady without, some of his key weapons. He does have Mike Evans and Gronk and then some other dudes. Fournette's going to be super, super popular. Big total here for Tampa. What do you have here as far as the Bucs?
Yeah, like you said, it's a big wait and see game here just because Fournette averaged over his last month prior to injury, 13.5 carries, 7.5 targets, truly was the engine of that offense. Even recall that Colts game where they couldn't really move the ball with explosive plays on the cover 2. Matt Eberflus was running, but Fournette spiked 4 touchdowns and just broke the game open in the fourth quarter. And so waiting on that, we also saw a little bit of a hint at what we talked about in Mike Evans taking on a larger target share. Now, Gronk and Evans were both active to chase their incentives. They even have the clip that's going viral right now where Gronk is requesting his final catch in the last quarter. He goes over to Brady. He goes over to Brady and says like 1 catch short. Brady just confirms 1 more catch. They run a little just quick flat route. He catches it. And then Gronk goes back to the sideline like the 12-year-old he is and starts dancing and saying, I got $1 million. I'm going to the city. And now we have Evans also, who was out there chasing incentives too, but he only had an 18.5% target share and played the fewest snaps he's played in a full game all year. And he was Tampa Bay's only receiver with any amount of end zone targets and has yet to reach a 28% target share in any game. And so expecting an every snap wide receiver without Chris Godwin, without Antonio Brown for the first time all year, like there's really a chance that Evans sees a 38% target share, something wild in this game. And so given the fact that the Eagles also on defense, untested since they didn't play a strong schedule at all in the last 2 months, I do think we get like a blow up game here for Evans.
Rich, you on board with that?
No, not really.
Let's hear it.
I love it. But I mean, the biggest problem is, well, one, the Eagles have been awesome against opposing wide receiver ones all year. Only Tyreek Hill scored 3 of the 4 touchdowns that the wide receiver one scored against them this season. Only Deebo Samuel and Tyreek had more than 79 yards receiving. We've also seen Mike Evans, over the course of his career and this season, the one thing he's susceptible to is physical shadow coverage. And he's going to get that here against Darius Slay. These two teams played early in the season, and Slay shadowed him on all of his routes, 2 of 4 targets, 27 yards in that game. These guys met once before, and Mike Evans only had 25 yards against Darius Slay. Marshawn Lattimore got Evans twice. Trayvon Diggs shadowed him and shut him down, and Slay did too. So Evans, we've seen him, of course, career. He's a guy that is susceptible to man coverage. Now, he can score a touchdown because, like Daigle said, he's going to get those end zone targets. But I see this game as like a death by 1,000 paper cuts Brady game. I see Gronk and Leonard Fournette, Cameron Brate, even maybe a little bit of Tyler Johnson. I see the intermediate passing game. I see this is a game where Brady completes like 80% of his passes, has a low ADOT. He had his lowest ADOT of the season when these teams played earlier in the season in that Thursday night game. I think, the Eagles, they don't blitz. They play zone at one of the league's highest rates. I really think that this is like a supreme, like death by 1,000 paper cuts Brady efficiency game.
One, We don't have many Reeves Daigle standoffs, so I'm excited.
Yeah.
This is fun. And two, I have bet the over already in this game. Now I got steamed on the under. I believe I sharp money, so we'll see how that turns out. But I do actually like the over because I think the Eagles can carry their weight in this game as well.
We haven't fought in about anything in this show since like Red Zone. I think like 7 weeks ago or something like that.
It's been a long season.
I was on an island being pro Red Zone, which I never felt like I would be like that. Who dislikes Red Zone? Whatever. Now not worth rehashing.
And Evans also didn't practice today with the hamstring. I think that's still going on with him.
Well, he left the game, the previous game. Is that what it was? Was it for a hamstring? I know he left the game for something last week.
He's been dealing with it for multiple weeks. It's not going to hold him out. I just think he's more of like a touchdown or bust type of guy. Like we'll see him get a handful of targets, but he needs the touchdowns. I don't know if we're got like a high yardage game.
I thought he was benched. I just thought he was chasing the incentives and hit the bench. If he played limited those 71% of snaps because he was limited with the hamstring injury, that changes my argument altogether. So we'll see Friday's practice report.
Rich, you mentioned Cameron Brate. I mean, all the one of those thousand cuts. He's a possible cheapie as far as tight ends?
I mean, I don't know how you really get there. Like, I think he's more of like a Hail Mary, like desperation play. Like if you're just saving salary, because I do think it's a Gronk, Leonard Fournette game, like out of the backfield. I mean, you look at where teams have beat up the Eagles the entire season. It's with look at how they play defense. They've allowed the fewest rate of 20-yard completions in the NFL. They play, zone coverage the 71% of the time. They don't blitz. They're 31st in the NFL in blitz rate. It's just predicated. I mean, Daigle talked about Matt Eberflus earlier in this, earlier. This is where Jonathan Gannon came from. He brought it over. This is what they're going to do. So I think it's definitely a heavy Leonard Fournette game, and he obviously people will be drawn to him because of what he was doing before. High value touches. He still finished second in the NFL in opportunities inside the 10-yard line, even missing those 3 games to end the year. He was catching the ball at a crazy rate. The Eagles are 26th in receiving points allowed to running backs, 21st in rushing points allowed to running backs. Fournette lit them up in the Thursday night game they played earlier in the season. And then Gronk didn't play in that game, but OJ Howard caught 6 of 7 targets in that game. The Bucs tight ends caught 9 of 11 targets in that game for 75 yards and a touchdown. I really just think this is a game where like Brady just absolutely just is surgical. Like just he might throw like 10 incompletions this game, maybe less.
John, amongst Tyler Johnson and Perryman and Miller and Darden, this is like GPP dart stuff. You're looking to separate yourself in the field in some way. Do you have a preference amongst that group?
Well, it would be Cyril Grayson, but then he got injured, so we're waiting on his, but it doesn't sound good right now. Tyler Johnson has averaged 6.5 targets the past 2 games, as Rashad Perryman has slowly been working his way back from the COVID list. And prior to going on the COVID list, Perryman did usurp Johnson as the team's number 3 receiver, but now they're just throwing Tyler Johnson to the slot and letting him work there. So I guess if you told me to pick an ancillary one, it would be Tyler Johnson.
Rich, anybody for you it stands out, or it's just we're throwing darts?
Yeah, largely throwing darts. I mean, Tyler Johnson's been out there getting a lot of exercise. He's had some targets come his way. Hasn't really done anything with them. Right. He would fit kind of like the corollary of what I've drawn to how I've envisioned this game kind of playing out. But it's a long play.
Rich, I look at this Eagles backfield. Sanders, Howard, Scott, Gainwell. It looks like a big old headache. 18 team total projected to be down. Maybe one of them be interesting as far as catching passes on the comeback or something like that. Is there a lot or anything to like here? Is there somebody that's going to separate themselves from the group here that, that stands out for you, or it's mostly an ignore?
I mean, I love the collectively we play Eagles running back, like one guy, like just Eagles running back. Sure. I would love to do that because I think they're going to run the ball better than people like think they will in general, because people think the Bucs, right, in the run defense. And the run defense has been a little beatable like towards the end of the season, especially with the amount of injuries they've had. But also we've just seen like the way the Eagles now have incorporated their offensive scheme since the time these teams played. Remember when they played earlier in the season? I mean, this is when the Eagles were a lot more pass heavy. I mean, weeks 1 through 6, they had a 58% pass rate. And then since these teams have played, it's just 38%, the lowest in the NFL. And what they've really done is swerved into the RPO run game and incorporating Jalen Hurts into the run game. They lead the NFL in runs, in RPO runs by a mile. Their running backs lead the NFL in RPO runs ahead of the Cardinals. And that's just hard to defend against. We've seen them play good run defenses over the course of the stretch. Remember, they played the Saints, they had no trouble running on the Saints. At the time they played Washington was one of the best run defenses. They ran all over them. So, I mean, it's just part of the scheme. I think it's be hard for the Bucs to still defend it as good as they are against the run. I still think there will be an opportunity for splash play runs. I just don't really know who you play. I mean, Miles Sanders, anytime we've gone down the road at Miles Sanders, he either leaves the game. He's getting touches, but like he hasn't scored a touchdown all year. So maybe like he gets it here, but we've just been chasing. I just would love to play Eagles running back in bulk. I don't know what to tell you like what on the individual pieces though.
I'm getting a flashback to like was a Tecmo Bowl many years ago. Like they didn't have the rights to a certain player.
It was QB Eagles. It was
Cunningham. It was that's
QB
what
Eagles.
I'm thinking. Cunningham's like, give me more money. Like, nah, we'll just put QB Eagles. Make a guy that looks kind of sort of like you. Thanks anyway.
As Reeves touched on in that last matchup, Miles Sanders didn't even have a carry until the fourth quarter. Like they were literally just passing the ball against the Bucs. That's the way they approached it, where they changed it completely. And on that same note, like he touched on as well, the Bucs have permitted the third highest rate of 10+ yard carries since returning from their bye in week 10. It's funny because they've been the Saquon Barkley of rush defenses. Like they don't bend, but they do break at times. So they'll allow the explosives, but as a whole, they've just allowed the 6th fewest rushing yards per game in that time as well. But really, that's what we're going for. We're going for explosive runs here. And they were susceptible on the ground to quarterbacks. Josh Allen went over 100. Mm-hmm. Cam Newton had 40 yards. Even the past couple of weeks, Michael Carter had a couple of explosive runs. Chuba Hubbard had success last week. And so overall, like I think there is some shakiness here in the Bucs front seven. That sort of leads me to want to play Jalen Hurts.
That's what I was going to say. Maybe the running back that he's not a running back, obviously, but he can run. Maybe he's the best option. He's the one, it's going to have the ball in his hands more than the rest of them.
What we're hoping for is like a Jalen Hurts jailbreak game a la Lamar Jackson against the Titans. Like we're hoping for 50+ attempts, 20 carries, 500 yards of total offense, because we've seen a couple times this year where Eagles were down 14 points and Jalen Hurts still gets there with those 1-yard quarterback sneaks in garbage time. And so that's what you'd be hoping for. And then, since I already know the Dean hosting phenomenon is that you're going to ask me, who do you stack them with then? And I think you don't have to play them naked. I think you can play them with Dallas Goedert too, because since Zach Ertz was traded, Goddard actually leads all tight ends and targets per route run. And the Bucs have been susceptible, allowing over 7 yards per target or 7 yards per attempt to opposing tight ends. And so, I kind of like just jamming in Goddard, being on the field for every snap, and then hoping for some explosive rushing from Hurts as well.
You on board with that, Rich? I think you go both ways with that. I think you can play Hurts a la carte, or you can pair him with Goddard or Smith. I don't know how much more I want to go beyond that as far as Rieger or Watkins. Like, Watkins can catch a homer and really can't bank, and then obviously the floor is rough. Rich, touch on Hurts and his potential pass receivers.
Yeah, I mean, we have a hard enough time just playing Devontae Smith for the amount of targets he gets, let alone trying to get into the weeds on Rieger and Quez Watkins. Like I would love to feel confidently playing Devontae Smith, but that hasn't been the case just because the raw targets haven't been there. And this is another one of those games. Like, how does this game start, right? How does this game go? I mean, the Eagles are the worst team in the NFL this season against teams with a winning record. They went 1-7 against teams this season with a winning record. No team had a worse record than them. So it's going to be interesting. Dale kind of hit upon it. I mean, their wins when they came back from the grave. I mean, they beat the Broncos, the Saints, the Jets, the football team twice, and the Giants. So, I mean, this is a huge litmus test here. When these teams played earlier in the year, it was 28-7 with 6 minutes left in the third quarter. Jalen Hurts gets the rushing touchdowns at the end to get there. He was objectively god-awful passing. He was 12 of 26 passing in this game, 4.4 yards per pass attempt. The Bucs pressured him on 55% of his dropbacks in that game. He was 4 of 13 under pressure. You're just hoping for a ton of dropbacks. Like they said, we need like that scenario where it's just the Eagles fall like way behind and they just have no choice but to like let Hurts just drop back a ton. But the only problem with it too is on the other side of the ball, like do the Buccaneers have like quick strike touchdowns, or is it where they have like a bunch of like 8-yard completions and just like suck out the clock in this game too, inversely, while they're still being effective moving the football. But Hurts would be the guy to look at. The ceiling has dropped significantly since they've started to run the football. But like I said, it's tethered to that schedule that they played and the game script that they had, which we could see going off the rails here in a scenario.
You're rostering Hurts. He throws a pick six in the very first play. You're excited about it.
Sure.
Now, let's go.
Yeah.
I'll give you those 2 points, man. You can have them. I'm going to get him back in the back end in theory.
Yep.
Like, it feels like a really good chase game for Hurts here. And the script suggests.
It's like rostering Stafford over the last month. You get really excited in those first half couple of picks.
Anything else in this game, boys? We're moving on. We're moving on, right? I think so.
That's it.
San Fran, Dallas, 51. Big old total. 27.5 as far as the team total for Dallas this week. They're 4-point favorites versus San Francisco. Well, I'll throw it to you, Rich. Talk about the Cowboys. They seem to be a pretty appealing offense, right?
Well, this is the only game that's not a rematch, so it's fun, right? We finally have. This is a new game. It's the only game we haven't seen yet on the weekend, and I think objectively, too, a lot of people are looking forward to this game the most. The Cowboys were 6-0 against the NFC East and 6-5 versus everybody else. So how real are they? I mean, they went 3-4 versus playoff teams, and 2 of those wins came against the Eagles. So kind of how real are the Cowboys? We've seen them definitely have their hiccups over the course of the season. Just 2 weeks ago, they lost as home favorites to the Cardinals, a team that's their only win over the past 5 weeks too. So that's definitely in the open. Schematically, this is a pretty interesting matchup because of the way the Cowboys play defense. They lead the NFL in terms of cover one. That not really Dan Quinn's bag, but he kind of swerved into kind of the personnel the Cowboys had. Who knew? You actually coached to the players. And then they run cover three on 33% of plays. They really live in those two formations. Here's the catch. Jimmy Garoppolo against cover three, absolutely phenomenal. 6th in the NFL in quarterback rating, led the NFL in completion rate against cover three. Against cover one, though, much different story. 18th in the NFL, 57% completion rate, 89.8 quarterback rating, which is 14th in the NFL. So the two base defenses that the Cowboys live in, Jimmy Garoppolo is really excellent against one scheme and really awful and mediocre against the other. So kind of what wins out. That's kind of the story of Jimmy Garoppolo's career, right? Like even last week, makes the terrible interception to the Jalen Ramsey, throws the ball behind Kittle, gets the ball back with, a minute left and has the best drive he's had in his 49ers career. So we might live that roller coaster life with Garoppolo again on Sunday.
All right, John, your thoughts as far as that game and this game. And yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned throwing the ball to Kittle. You didn't throw the ball to Kittle enough last week for my liking. Is Kittle going to get a bunch of throws this week here, John?
I believe so. When you talk about the matchups, though, like we talked about with the Patriots and Bills, I kind of think this is the worst possible draw for the Cowboys, just because outside of Garoppolo's numbers against cover one, we also know in hindsight, and being a strong pass defense, the Cowboys also allowed 4.3 yards per carry to opposing running backs. And what we can now see was against the second easiest schedule of opposing rushing offenses. And we know what the 49ers ultimately want to do. And that's either plug away with Elijah Mitchell, who's averaged 23.5 carries in his last 5 starts around multiple injuries, or hand the rock to Deebo Samuel in any way possible, as he's averaged 6.7 carries and over 7.5 targets in his last 3 games. We're finally seeing the culmination of him as a running back coming along with the routes and targets as well, even getting in for a 24-yard touchdown throw this past game. And so overall, I still think what the 49ers want to do is questionable as to whether or not the Cowboys can stop it. And so how much Kittle, how much Ayuk is involved. Again, we can't carry both of them. We've seen that it's basically impossible for both of them to go off. You need one or the other. But like Deebo, Elijah Mitchell, that's kind of where I'm looking at on the 49ers offense, because I think they can have a lot of success.
I know it's been like a running joke, like give Deebo like running back eligibility, but like for real, why is he not also a running back? He's getting 8-7 carries, and I don't know if you guys play baseball DFS, like they never could figure out what to do with Ohtani. Like they never knew what to do. Like, is he pitching? Is he in the outfield? The sites had no clue, and maybe it's hard to. You can't put an RB/WR on him. Is that so hard? I don't know.
To be fair, he only played 80 backfield snaps the entire season. Like I don't think that warrants a position change.
It's increased, as the season has progressed, though, right? I would assume.
No, it's not like crazy though. It's only when he gets the carries, right? Like he's never really in the backfield like Holloway, like Patterson would be.
That's fair.
And that's my only like. I don't want to go the bridge too far. The dude played 700 snaps at wide receiver. Like,
all right, it was like Cam Akers when he was on the field, he was getting a touch.
I mean, I don't know, but maybe we would get to the day where there's positionless football and it's fine. But I don't really think that we need to change him to be. Anyways, you would want Deebo Samuel to be a wide receiver anyways for fantasy scoring. Like it matters more his output at wide receiver. So I mean, it'd be tough. it's one of those things, right? Like, hey, his floor matters more there.
Rich, as far as quarterbacks, and I guess you can kind of bring in the whole Saturday slate, Sunday slate into effect, like Brady, Hurts, Garoppolo, Prescott, Mahomes, Big Ben. We know who number 6 is in the power rankings. Well, where do you have Dak?
He would probably be like kind of in the behind Mahomes and Brady. Like, I think basically kind of in that area. Hurts in the mix in that area. And we've seen Dak kind of he's given us a couple eggs, over the back half of the season. But I definitely believe that this game swerves into the Cowboys having to win through the air rather than on the ground. I mean, the 49ers are number 2 in the NFL in DVOA against the run. They are 16th against the pass. They are good against, they're number 2 in the NFL in success rate against the run. And we've seen Zeke over the back half of the season. Even on Sunday night, they were trying to get Zeke 1,000 yards and get him out of the game. It took 18 carries against the Eagles backups to get Zeke to 1,000 yards. It was the most yards the dude's had in a game since week 6. And like, they were just out there trudging, trying to get him that 1,000 yards. The only reason we would play Zeke is literally just for touchdown equity. That's like literally it. The only reason to play him is that, he had the 12 touchdowns, he had 10 scores and 21 touches inside the 10. That's really his role. Like, he's going to be on the field a lot. He's going to give us a bunch of hollow yardage, and we hope he scores a touchdown. So I really believe it's going to fall on Dak Prescott's shoulders this game because of the strength of the 49ers defense being versus the run and them being weaker against the pass. And, they've gone through a couple stretches where they're hot. Like last week, the second half of that game, they were awesome. They were able to get pressure on Matthew Stafford. But in the first half of that game, they got absolutely carved up and shredded. So I do think that this is going to be like a game that Dak Prescott has to win.
And the favorite receiver for Dallas for you is?
It's tough, man. I mean, since Amari complained, he's got a bunch of targets. But he's still been very volatile. CeeDee Lamb had just one wide receiver 2 or better scoring week over his final 7 games. He hasn't scored a touchdown since week 10, but he still is just out there a ton, and we know the talent exists. And if I believe that this is a game Dak Prescott has to win, I mean, I would be interested in playing CeeDee Lamb. I wish he was priced more better than where he is, though.
It looks like a better price on DK as opposed to FanDuel. I'm just kind of jumping back and forth on FanDuel. We have Cooper at 7-1, Lamb at 7-3 on DK, 5-9 for Cooper, 6-2 for Lamb. So, I understand the price on the FanDuel. He's typically a little bit more expensive, but it feels like there's a bigger gap than normal. Jump in here, John, as far as feel free. Who's the best receiver here for Dallas this week?
I still kind of like sneaking in Dalton Schultz. People are going to cite his snap rate and routes run from last week, and that was Blake Jarwin's first game back. And his Schultz's route participation was his lowest since Blake Jarwin was last available. But at the same time, remember, like, their backups were in the game by the 4th quarter. They were trying to give other players their incentives. So I think we still, like, when push comes to shove in a playoff game, we see Dalton Schultz as a full-time player. And I would just rather take that chance. Not guaranteed, but I don't mind taking that chance if everyone thinks that he suddenly has gone back to a rotational role with an injured tight end who just got back from in reserve. I'm also just worried about the Cowboys passing attack in general, because yes, it does have to come through Dak Prescott, but we've also seen a little exposure now that whenever Dak Prescott is under pressure, that's when the Cowboys offense has struggled, in particular since week 9 when he returned and has been playing through the calf injury. Whether or not that still exists or not, no idea. But 3 games against defenses creating a bottom 10 in pressure rate. Since he returned from injury in week 9, those games, Falcons, Giants, and Cardinals, those were his best efforts, and he didn't even go over 300 yards. The Raiders, for example, were one of the toughest pass rushers he played. They averaged the 4th highest pressure rate on the entire year, but also in that game against the Cowboys on Thanksgiving, when Dak went for 375 and 3 touchdowns, the Raiders finished with a bottom 4 pressure rate. So they didn't actually get pressure despite being a good team and rushing the passer. And so overall, like now with the 49ers, creating the 6th highest pressure rate on the year. Like if it comes down to Dak and the 49ers are getting pressure, I'm just really worried about the Cowboys offense as a whole.
Well, you talked about Zeke. I know Rich talked about Zeke kind of being kind of sort of washed. We've talked about all season long, and it took him forever to get his 1,000-yard season. But 1,000-yard season this day is just like, you stayed healthy. Like that's kind of what a celebration of it is to some extent.
And that was the story of his fantasy season. Like a dude, he kept playing.
Yeah, you stayed in the field, which is like there's value to that in fantasy and all that, but like never 1,000 yards used to be like a thing. Like this guy's 1,000-yard receiver, and like now it's like whatever. But my point is, Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just saying he was a top 4 running back, through the first 5 games, and then he got injured. And that's kind of the story. He just kept playing through injury.
So the Cowboys see what everybody else sees, right? They see that he's not that great, and they see that a lot of people think Pollard's better than him. Pollard is practicing. I guess what I'm asking is, Rich, you think Pollard might get a little bit more and Zeke might get a little bit less? Or are they too stubborn to do that, and they're going to keep throwing him out there?
There's been no signal. I mean, Zeke was second in the NFL in snaps played at running back. Like, there's really been no signal for it. Like, Pollard's an ancillary, like, big play guy. I mean, he doesn't get a lot of touches, and he's not involved at all in the green zone. And he's also playing with a Liz Frank injury, right? So,
yeah.
Dean,
I mean, it's just tough. Like, if you play Pollard, it's literally like the Thanksgiving slate, right? Like, you're hoping he just has a big play that he converts.
You ask if this organization is just stubborn. Like, remember, it's been 27 years since they made it past the divisional round.
Yeah, not Jerry Jones.
27 years. Like, they don't make wise decisions. This is what they do. They're going to keep playing Zeke.
Well, their owner is also their GM, right? I guess kind of like de facto GM. They have an official
And
GM. They
coach.
probably have one, right? And good coach. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and no, they don't have a GM. Jerry Jones is the GM.
Oh, he is for real. Okay, yeah, I don't. Yeah,
He's gotten more hands off the last like 4 or 5 years, but he's still ultimately the GM. And like you said, they can see what we can see. We can also just go to like Spotrac or Over the Cap and see 92 million into Zeke, and they see that, and so that's why he keeps playing.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I don't, how many more years they got on that contract? Like 3 or 4 or something like that. I feel like he's going to be around for a while, or they're not guaranteed, so they can
after David Johnson, Jared Goff, and Matthew Stafford. I refuse to say like a team cannot get out of any deal. I truly think every contract is now tradable. They broke that trend, but it is admittedly a really tough one to get out of.
I mean, but do they even want to? I feel like they don't feel like the rest of us feel about the situation. Like, I think they're pretty pleased with Zeke's play.
Especially since their offseason, they have a choice to either take off like Michael Gallup or Amari Cooper off the books. And so like, hey, here's this extra cap. What are you going to do? Oh, we'll keep Zeke around and then just use Cedric Wilson.
Okay. Anything else that's worth saying here, Rich, as far as the Niners before we move on and talk about Pittsburgh and Kansas City?
No, I mean, we didn't talk about like ancillary guys like, Cedric Wilson is out there, anytime since he's run a pass route on 71% of the dropbacks. He's more of a touchdown or bust guy, but he has been involved. And like I said,
all right.
I like Dak doubles if you're going here with like Debo and Elijah Mitchell. This might be the game like you onslaughts. It's the one game that you figure could be like the most optimal back and forth game of the weekend, right?
It's not maybe Pittsburgh, Kansas City.
Well, no, I mean, you can make an argument like for total points, like you get there, like, and even we talk about Tampa Bay, Philly, but like those could be one-sided as well. Like this game could be one of those games that was like high and tight, like you like to say, Dean.
There you go.
I like, since you're planting your flag, I like Eagles Bucks a lot. I like getting on the Eagles side and then running it back with Bucks, and then maybe just playing like Elijah Mitchell as the hammer for this game, for like a low-scoring game where he just goes over 130.
How would you build that? Just on the fly? Would you start with Hurts? I'm assuming you're starting with Brady, or you're starting with Hurts?
I like Hurts, and then you just hope for the best. You Hurts, you get your little zone catchers and Fournette and Gronk and Mike Evans, and then you run Hurts and Goddard out there, and then you go from there.
Yeah, well, can you play Fournette, Gronk, and Mike Evans with Hurts? Can you do something like that? I guess you can, but because it's short slates, obviously. But
you got to find ways to get cheap elsewhere. Yeah. I think the Patriots kind of open that up, but yeah. Now the Sunday slate's a little tougher.
Yeah, Pittsburgh, Kansas City. This is the third game on the Sunday slate. The nightcap. 46.5 is the total. Kansas City is favored by 12.5 points here against Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is Big Ben's hopefully his last game ever. We will see that. Well, CEH and Darrell Williams both practiced on a Wednesday. Tyreek Hill practiced as well with his heel. On the other side, Najee Harris dealing with that elbow. He did not practice for what it's worth. Took him forever to get back out in the field, by the way. I remember I was watching Twitter. They're like, yeah, he's going to come back. And like 2 quarters later, it's like, oh, there he is. And now I got 2 fantasy points out of Harris. He's supposed to be their workhorse. I presume he will be this week. We'll see. Stay tuned as far as updates on that. Rich, let's knock out the Pittsburgh side first. Ben Roethlisberger's quarterbacking them. We assume it's going to be Harris in the backfield who can catch a bunch of passes. He's their do-all guy, assuming he's good to go with his elbow. But yeah, Pittsburgh offense. Go ahead, Rich.
Pain, just a lot of pain. I mean, this is undoubtedly the worst offense in the postseason on paper. I mean, they were 31st in the NFL in success rate per play. They were 24th in the league in points per drive. That's the lowest rate of all playoff teams. I said that, talked earlier, the Texans led for more offensive snaps than Steelers. They were 30th in success rate per drop back. Only the Panthers and Giants were worse. And, when these teams played earlier in the year, the Chiefs were up 36-3 with 2.5 minutes left to go in the game, in a game where Travis Kelce didn't play and Tyreek Hill ran 20 pass routes. It's just really hard. Like, right. I understand it's NFL and even Sunday. We've been here with some of these games before, but we have seen, this is the largest spread in wildcard history, wildcard round, but heavy favorites have been sound bets to cover too. It's not one of these situations where you're just like, all right, well, I'll take the large, point spread and just spray. Teams heavy road favorites, like I said, heavy favorites in general, double-digit favorites, has been 8 in the wild card round. Only one of those teams lost outright. That was the Saints, the Beastquake game. And 8 of those teams covered the double-digit point spread. We had one of those last year with the Saints covering against the Bears in the Trubisky MVP game. It's just really, really hard to draw an objective path to the Steelers offense. I mean, this offense is just so it's a potato gun, man. Like, it's what are we expecting? We're gonna get a bunch of 6-yard passes. It just is what it is. I mean, only Zach Wilson had a worse success rate per drop back than Ben Roethlisberger this year.
Who is the quarterback of Pittsburgh next year? Who do you got for me? Who's the big free agent? Is it Russ? Is it Rodgers? Are they gonna draft somebody?
Do they do any of that? Do they just go forward with Mason Rudolph?
No,
I don't know.
No.
My personal guy that I would love to see go there is Marcus Mariota. Because Matt Canada's offense, and I don't want to give Matt Canada any credit because he hasn't earned any either. It's not like he's like, I don't want to just absolve him because Ben Roethlisberger has been kind of poor and held this offense back. But that offense is literally predicated on having a mobile quarterback and moving the quarterback around. And if they don't get a guy that's built like that, like why even keep Matt Canada too? Like, go out and get the quarterback that fits his scheme the best. And I think the cheapest and short-term answer, where it wouldn't cost you any money but could like still keep you around and be a competitive team, would be Mariota.
I was gonna say Huntley. Also, maybe could be. I don't know.
But
What
he's not like
is.
why would the Ravens trade Huntley to the Steelers? Like, get out of here. You call me.
I thought he might be a free agent. I don't know. I don't know what his story is. He signed long-term, Huntley? I don't know.
He's on a rookie deal, so he's probably. Well, if he was an undrafted rookie, right, his contract would be expire after 3 years, but then he would be able to be tagged for a restricted free agent, if I'm correct. But he's still under contract for next year for sure then.
I actually do think they stick with Rudolph. Otherwise, if you told me to go off the board, I'll take Matt Ryan as my pick.
Okay.
Who does not
another mobile quarterback
who does not fit their offense, which is why I think he's a perfect Steeler, because that's
so he's the IRFA, he's the exclusive rights free agent. Tyler Huntley.
Do you guys want? I mean, like, you could play Deontay Johnson, get all the 6-yard catches you want. I suppose, what's to say? It's a short slate and these things can happen, but it doesn't sound like we're terribly enthused as far as the Pittsburgh side. John,
I kind of like Claypool, just because we've seen his route participation progressively increase 5 consecutive games, so much so that he was in on 96% of Roethlisberger's dropbacks this past game. Also a season high, 91% of the snaps. Now that probably happened because Deontay left early, but yeah, like we've seen time and time again where Claypool, the targets will be inaccurate, but he can still get them. And in my opinion, he has the higher ceiling than Deontay. So I don't mind playing Claypool here.
Jump on over to the Chiefs. What do you have for me?
Rich pretty much summed it up, how they did well without their top players this past game, and now we're kind of waiting on everyone. I think the running back spot is super interesting since we have seen that the running back is their third receiver, whomever it may be, Clyde Edwards-Helaire or Darrell Williams. And then we've also seen that one or the other, since we're waiting on both, but Edwards-Helaire averaged 13.5 touches in the 4 games he returned for prior to injury again. And then when Edwards-Helaire was out, Williams averaged 18 touches per game as a bell cow in 6 starts without CH earlier this year. So I think the running backs are a great spot to start with. And then I guess we just have to wait on reports for Tyreek Hill. Still frustrated that they didn't give us any pregame reports that he injured his heel. But yeah, that's kind of what we're waiting on. And then of course you would expect to see a higher target share for Travis Kelce if Tyreek Hill's out, not like the 4 targets he received this past week. So I'm just kind of waiting on the injury reports right now for all of them.
Yeah, they did. Like they didn't practice on a Wednesday as far as Williams and CEH and Hill. So that seems like positive momentum as far as playing. Rich, what do you have as far as Kansas City?
Andy Reid, he was more optimistic about Williams and Hill. CH, they said they were going to kind of take the week to evaluate and see. I mean, it's one of these spots too, like where they might just buy time with him, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, it remains to be seen, or he left that game earlier. Chiefs running backs, when these teams played a couple weeks ago, they had 40 combined touches in that game for 222 yards, or Derek Gore went over 100 yards in that game, mopping up. I mean, the Steelers have just been dog walked. Latavius Murray came out of the grave for 150 yards last week against them. I mean, it's just, they've been just smoked on the ground to end the season. If game script kind of dictates here, I wish we could get clarity, but like we don't have it on the time we're doing the show. If we just knew Darrell was playing and we can lock in his touches, because Darrell, Clyde Edwards-Helaire played 30 snaps, or he played 30% of the snaps before he got hurt. Darrell still had 14 touches for 85 yards in that game, then just like gave over the fourth quarter to Gore. Williams is a guy that, definitely where his pricing is at, we would love to lock him in as the RB1 of this team if Helaire is held out, but we just don't know right now. He'd be the guy I'd be looking at the most. And then Mahomes is literally just the syrup over the pancakes argument, right? Like, if you just want to get it right, play Mahomes.
Yeah, you're talking about this matchup here against Pittsburgh, big favorites, and like their running backs being a little bit banged up, and maybe it's just a Milton Berle game. They just do just enough to win, but they can pull back on CEH if they're up by 17 in the fourth quarter, that kind of thing, and there's no reason to run them to the ground. And Gore's, they're all kind of running backs, whatever. They don't matter, yada, yada. They're all kind of sort of basically the same to various degrees. Yeah, that makes me think that, it'll be interesting. We'll see how it goes down. There's no reason to speculate on Wednesday night, but we'll see.
And I just wonder, maybe everyone plays Mahomes because he still has the name right, Patrick Mahomes. It gets people excited. But remember, even in this past game, the Steelers 36 points scored, and he was sitting there with just 250 and 3 TDs. In the second half of the season, since they changed their offense, became a more shallower offense. Like his 3 games that he exploded over 300 yards for, you could point to why. And it was the cover 3 instances against the Raiders that he just sprayed for 9 touchdowns and 0 picks total. And then the Chargers game, whenever they lost Derwin James. So, it's still not really a slate where I'm terrified of Mahomes. Like Brady and Jalen Hurts could easily just beat him and outscore him.
So
that's kind of where we are with the Chiefs, right? Like so we've kind of worked our way back to like the Chiefs being one of the best teams in the NFL, and they ended up in context of the season being one of the best offenses in the NFL again. But like it just feels like they're not the boogeyman like they were the last 2 years.
Yeah, and they are still the best offense in the league.
Right.
It's just not as fun to watch anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny is like we compare the Chiefs to old Chiefs teams, and that's why we think that they're not a good offense anymore.
Right.
But compared to the actual league, they are still the best offense.
That's why even like, if CEH is out here, if we're projecting like a heavy game script again, you could even go crazy and play Darrell Williams with with Derek Gore. Frank Gore would also go for 100 yards in this game.
He probably would.
Yeah, Derek Gore and Darrell Williams together is totally fine, especially if you're trying to save salary.
Yeah, like fading the Chiefs is not the sphincter clincher once was, that kind of thing. It still is. It's still a sphincter clincher, but not exactly the same. It's not as scary like you say, but still, like Tyreek in theory can get loose. Kelsey has those ceiling games where he goes absolutely ballistic. And, this is where I ask if you're going to play one of them. And as far as the defensive scheme and all that kind of stuff, John, you're going to play either Tyreek, you're going to play Kelsey. I understand position matters too, but do you have a preference as far as one of those two studs on KC?
I guess given the landscape of the slate, it would be Tyreek Hill. All the options we've talked about, it's hard to play all these guys, even in the 3-game slate. Given that we have Gronk and Goddard there, and for all the reasons we talked about why we love them, I think I would just put the fade on Kelsey in this particular 3-game.
Rich, same question?
Yeah, I mean, I think tight end is very, if you're playing the Sunday slate, I mean, it's loaded. I mean, you've got Kittle, you've got Schultz, you got Goddard, you got Gronk. I mean, it's tough to pay the iron price for Kelsey. It'd be easy just to say, yeah, I'll play the healthy guy. We don't know how healthy Tyreek is. What if he doesn't play the full game and you're paying that kind of price for him? But I do also think it's hard to just pay up. I would only really be playing Kelsey, I think, in the small field, like when I would go with like a Chiefs onslaught.
I love the iron price reference. That always gets me to smile every single time I hear it. Let's move on to the Monday night game. Of course, the Monday night game it's mostly a showdown deal, and we'll kind of touch this real quick. Also, you can play the Saturday through Monday slate as well. Again, the sites have given you all sorts of options to play all sorts of different players. Arizona versus the Rams, 49.5 is the total. The Rams are a 4-point favorite. And John, this feels like two offenses like should be better. Like what has happened to both these quarterbacks and both their offenses? Like it feels like it should be, not that it can't be a shootout, but it feels like this should be like a 56 total, mega just going back and forth and two fun offenses. And they've had their moments for sure. But am I wrong in saying this? It feels like they've been disappointing more than not of late.
And we talked about this a couple of weeks ago whenever the Cardinals-Cowboys game was highlighted on that slate. Just overall regression and how great Murray was, both in red zone offense for the Cardinals, third down conversion rate, passes 20-plus yards downfield. And now we've slowly seen a coming back to earth moment in the last month of the season for the Cardinals as a whole, in particular without DeAndre Hopkins, who won't play this game. We also know that on the other side of the ball, McVay is 5-1 against Kingsbury. The Rams have scored 30-plus points in 4 of those 6 matchups, including the most recent one in Week 14, which arguably was the last time we saw Matthew Stafford splice together a complete performance without multiple picks. That was the best game, I'm pretty sure in the last 2 months we've seen him play. And so you start with the Rams side, and it's kind of become clear where to go. Van Jefferson did bounce back after that 30% snap game this past week, running 30 routes to Odell Beckham's 35. But even then, even though the on-field peripherals have gotten stronger, it's kind of become Tyler Higbee's game, and he slowly emerged as their second receiver in his last 3 games since he returned from the COVID list, running around on 85% of Stafford's dropbacks and seeing a 22% target share in that span, behind Cooper Kupp, of course. So for the Rams, especially since we got Cam Akers involved here for 13 snaps and 8 touches, a role we only expect to grow this upcoming week, then it's kind of become just Stafford and Kupp to really hone in on the Rams side.
Rich, what do you have for me as far as the Rams offense? We'll talk about the Cardinals in a second, but again, Cooper Kupp, it's week. No, it's not like week 18. It's the playoffs. It's the first week of the playoffs. You all know Cooper Kupp's been an absolute stud all season long. If you can fit him in your lineups, by all means, go for it. He's been fabulous. Other guys in the Rams that are worth featuring here.
Yeah, I think, obviously we'll talk about the Cardinals, and, obviously everyone's talking about their on-off splits with DeAndre Hopkins, but one of the most disappointing elements of this team over this stretch of the final 5 weeks has been their defense. They've allowed opponents to score on 53% of their possessions. That's 30th in the NFL over that span. They've allowed a touchdown on 34% of offensive possessions. That's 30th in the NFL. Prior to that, they were 3rd in the NFL in both categories. So they're just getting roasted defensively too. The past 5 quarterbacks they faced, they've all posted top 10 scoring weeks. Russell Wilson, Dak Prescott, Carson Wentz, Jared Goff, and Stafford himself in the game that Daigle brought up. Stafford, literally, it comes down to when he doesn't throw picks, he's awesome. I mean, that week 14 game was the last game he didn't throw an interception. In the 6 games he hasn't thrown an interception this year, he's averaged 25.5 fantasy points per game with a low of 23.5 points per game. Not even inflated by a big game. When he has a turnover, 16.1 points per game with just 2 20-point games. 20-point games. If he plays a clean game, he's going to get there, especially with the state of way this Arizona defense is playing. It's funny. We talked about, just how Odell Beckham was passing the eyeball test, but when you go into the hood, it's the same shit we were getting in Cleveland. Him and Stafford, 56% catch rate on his targets, 6.4 yards per target. With the Browns, 50% catch rate, 6.8 yards per target. A lot of touchdown deodorant is covered up. He's got 5 touchdowns, 3 from 4 yards and in, that have really kind of saved his production. But when you look at those games, he didn't have a touchdown, you got caught holding the bag. But in one of his good games all around as a receiver was when these teams played on Monday night, or was it the Tuesday? Did they play Tuesday? I can't remember which week they moved that game to. But when they played in the night game, he did have 6 for 77. It was the second best game. He's still a boomer bust option. But yeah, he's kind of the next guy up that at least offers a little bit upside, because Van Jefferson is literally not just getting catches, and getting targets. You just have to hope he scores. He did score both games against the Cardinals, if it makes you feel better. But yeah, like Daigle said, Higbee's got 5 catches in each of his last 4 games. He's kind of stepped up to being the most consistent guy outside of Kupp.
I'm looking forward to Beckham's dad releasing a mixtape of Stafford's interceptions and things like that. That'll be great for sure.
I mean, he's in the overtime play, he's 6 yards behind that dude.
Yeah.
It's the same stuff though. When you look at all his splits, we're getting the same production we were getting in Cleveland. He just has some touchdowns.
I think it's worth talking about Cam Akers, just because he's really, really cheap, and a lot of people think he's super talented, coming back from his injury way faster than everybody expected. He's 4.2 on DK, 5.4 on FanDuel, like $16 on Yahoo. Last week, he got his feet wet, and now the games really, really matter. John, like, I mean, could you venture a guess, like how much more of that offense he's going to get, how much more of that running back situation he's going to grab a handle of, and is he worth, we're looking for something. We're looking for a guy to break in tournaments, and there's some upside in theory, at least.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good story, but he also had 13 yards on those 8 touches. So I don't know if he's like at full strength, even if the workload increases to have, half the touches. So that's what I'm worried about. Also, Justin slowly seeping up Sony Michel's targeting role, like pass catching role. We talked about how the last 2 games prior to Akers' return, they finally started using Michel like Darrell Henderson and giving him 9 targets. And then they got Akers involved instead for that role. So Sony Michel really just became a goal line or bust option. Whereas Akers, like I said, we expect his role to increase at least to, 40% of the touches, I'm going to assume. But either way, that makes it more of a Damian Harris or Mondre Stevenson situation where it's sort of hard to have confidence in either.
Yeah, if you have a thought on that, Rich, by all means, go for it. Also worth noting as far as the Arizona side, DeAndre Hopkins expected out. We're not sure on a Wednesday night as far as Edmonds. Connor also, I think, technically questionable. We did play out last week. Touch on the running backs this game.
Yeah, and the signal here too is the Rams. I mean, 80% of their offensive touchdowns are passing. It's the highest rate in the league. So you're literally chasing a touchdown from these running backs. You got to hope you get it on a team that really doesn't have a lot of rushing touchdowns on the season. And Arizona, 75% of the touchdowns they've allowed have been through the air, which is the second highest rate in the league. So I do think it's more of a passing game still for the Rams, although you can pop long runs on the Cardinals, even though they don't get a lot of touchdowns to backs. So it's just kind of like who gets that goal line carry, right? Like if they're in there, do they give Akers one? Like, do they feel like they want to get him a look and get a touchdown? Because at his pricing, if you get a touchdown, that's pretty significant. It's a lot of guesswork. Like it's just a lot of guesswork. It's a lot of spray and pray. Arizona, like we talked about, the Hopkins splits. I mean, it's a real thing. It's tough to say. I mean, the last 4 games, Kyler Murray's thrown for 6.2 yards per pass attempt. He has not thrown for more than 7 yards per pass attempt in any of those 4 games. Prior to that stretch, the lowest yards per pass attempt in a game was 7.6 yards per pass attempt. He's now had 220 dropbacks this season without DeAndre Hopkins on the field. He's completed 65% of his passes for 6.6 yards per pass attempt with Hopkins off the field, as opposed to 72%, 8.8 yards per pass attempt on the 323 dropbacks with DeAndre Hopkins on the field. It's significant. These other guys just aren't really kind of pulling their weight. Christian Kirk's like a fine ancillary receiver, but he's not a guy that can do heavy lifting. Also, your yards per pass attempt are going to drop when your most consistent target is Zach Ertz. No real shade on Zach Ertz. He's been they've been leaning on him. He's doing what Zach Ertz does, catching a bunch of passes for 9 yards of reception. But like that, it's just not, there's no explosion. There's no juice in this offense anymore when you have to funnel your targets through Zach Ertz. And that's kind of really what has slowed this thing down.
That's what everyone's talking about Ertz for these like playoff only formats, but you know what you're getting out of Ertz. Like, and we talked about this last week, how you didn't really want to play him on FanDuel because we're chasing touchdowns and ceiling. And at least for the ceiling part, like we don't think we're going to get it there. Whereas on DraftKings, you just sucked it up at the mid-price salary and just took the reception floor. So yeah, it's just like really hard to get excited about Ertz.
You know, anything else this game here, John, or shall we move on? And that's the slate. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, we're waiting on the Cardinals running back news. And it's important because we've seen them lean on one or the other if the other one's out. James Conner averaged 21 touches and 5 starts without Chase Edmonds. And Edmonds averaged 17 carries and 7.5 targets in week 16 and 17 sans Conner. And so if we get one or the other, to just lock them in as probably the only other captain in this slate, since everyone's probably going to naturally go to Cooper Kupp. But if it's both of them, you're probably taking the receiving upside, or I'm sorry, the red zone upside with James Conner, even though I would not be opposed to playing both, since we also know that usually entails Chase Edmonds still having the receiving role on DraftKings.
Conner on FanDuel's 8K. He's 6'3" on DK. As far as Edmonds on FanDuel is 6'4" and 5K on DraftKings. So, if we somehow get no Conner and Edmonds in, like who knows how this is going to go down. We're still kind of figuring that out. Got plenty of time. It's 4 days away. Rich, what else do you have as far as this game? I just took a peek at the clock. I didn't realize we kept a We kept the people for a long
We
time.
went like 20 minutes on Bengals Raiders, and I started mapping it out in my head, and I was like, I don't think we're gonna make this.
That was on me. I have the clock management of like I don't know who's the historically terrible clock management. Was it?
I mean, who's on after us? Does it matter? Like
nobody.
Oh, see, so it's fine.
Nobody's getting bumped. Nobody's in the green room waiting.
So it's fine. I mean, I don't know. I will say, AJ Green too is better games have come against the Rams. Maybe he's the cheapie that you take a shot at, but I don't know. That's really about it, man.
As we talked about last week, Antoine Wesley was literally just the touchdown or bust guy. And you saw what happens when he doesn't score touchdowns. 4 targets, 2 catches, 17 yards. So, yeah.
He's never open. Like, he's like blanket. Even the targets he does catch, it feels like this.
They're all contested.
Sensational contested catch.
Yeah. He's tall, man. Just throwing it up high.
Big dude, man. Big dude.
Let's end with this, man. Give me there's always an upset in wild card weekend. At least there's supposed to be, right? There's always give me the team that's going to upset like the one that we're not seeing coming, Rich. I'm sure you have is there Vegas or sports gambling? Not sports. Is there sports gambling legal in Ohio? You probably know a guy, if nothing else.
It finally passed, but it's not, it's finishing up the red tape stage, but it did get legalized here. So I can't do it yet, but I have a local bookie, but it feels like the chalk answer would be New England just because of the situation. I would say that I wouldn't be like surprised if the Bengals laid an egg. The only one I really can't see is the most obvious one, and it's Pittsburgh. I think any of the other ones, like, you could get there, Tampa Bay being maybe a distant, but if any of those other games were like wins by the underdog, I kind of really wouldn't even be like that floored.
John, you got one?
Yeah, I think, again, Patriots chalk answer. I'm really worried about that matchup for the Bills, though. That means a lot for the AFC. But also, I really think the 49ers are genuinely the better team. I just think they're the better team. So I'm going to go 49ers. I think the Cowboys match up horrifically with them.
You got a Super Bowl matchup? Is it too early for that?
I have Packers Chiefs mapped out in all my brackets. I understand that's not clever. Also, though, if it were the Patriots Packers, again, the Patriots and Bills mean so much for the brackets because both teams then walk to terrific matchups. The Patriots beat the Titans earlier this year. So, like, even in getting the number 1 seed, it doesn't really matter. They've already done it. So, that's the game we all should be watching because that's the one where they could represent the AFC. But I still think it's Chiefs Packers. Rich?
I like Bills Bucks because I'm an Omni Fantasy League and have both those teams drawing. But I genuinely do think the Bills are the best team in the NFL. If I'm like Daigle, I'm terrible. This is the spot, like that. This is the Death Star, man. Like, can they just get past this spot? Because I think if they can get past this spot, I think they're built to beat the Chiefs. And then whichever team they would, face, at the end of the line. But yeah, I'm pro Bills if they could get past this spot, man.
Because the Bills will play the Chiefs next round, and like the way the Chiefs, as we talked about, have altered their offense since week 9, it doesn't match up well at all with the Bills. Bills also, remember, and this is before they changed their offense, murdered the Chiefs earlier this year, whereas the Bills could bring the heat. So, yeah.
Well, we didn't talk about it because it didn't matter because they're playing the Steelers, but like the Chiefs defense is still who we thought they were. Like when they don't get like multiple turnovers per game, they're still they're still a terrible defense. Like it's just they're predicated on getting a lot of turnovers. It's just that we're not like Pittsburgh can't take advantage of even bad defenses at this point.
Their defense is kind of their offense too, putting them in positive predicaments and positive situations as far as the game. But yeah, forcing their opponent to go one-dimensional. But you're right, it doesn't matter how good or bad they are when they're facing Pittsburgh. Yeah, man, I hope this is it for Ben. I've had enough.
I mean, I don't want to make like a dunk on Steelers thing either, but like I floated out a tweet on Sunday night that asked like Steelers fans if they even wanted to see this version of the Steelers play more games, and the response was largely like, not really. Like,
they're not
because you figured like that was the ending, like right, like this was the ending. Ben beat the Browns and beat the Ravens on the way out. You don't have a losing record. And sure, you get to go to the postseason, but like you walk into being the largest underdogs in NFL history in the first round of playoffs. And now you end up potentially on like a sour note where you could have just said like, you know what, hey man, like we beat the Browns and Ravens. Ben went off on like a positive note. And like that was it, man. Like they don't believe that this team is they don't even really love this version of the Steelers team. You root for the colors. They're not rooting for them to lose by any means, but this isn't a good team.
Understood. All right. That was man, we clocked in like an hour and a half. We appreciate y'all sticking with us the entire time. If you guys stuck with us the entire time, Do hit that like button if you're listening on the old YouTube. Subscribe, turn on the notifications, find these guys at their socials. We're going to give them out in just 1 second. Like I can't imagine at this point, you always say it's week 18, not week 18. It's the week 1 of the playoffs after an 18-week season. If y'all are not, if you don't know where Hribar and Daigle are at this point, you're not looking for them. You're actively avoiding them if you're on Twitter because they're popping up all over the place as far as my timeline. Daigle, tell the people where they can find you.
But now you probably know, as you mentioned, but at Najee Daigle on Twitter and on NBC Sports Edge, if you're playing any playoff-only formats, even best ball, I have my top 70 playoff-only rankings up there that I'll be adjusting for injury reports and news through Saturday morning. The initial run's up there, though, with some notes at the bottom, some we talked about even tonight. And I base it on injuries, news, and even projected ownership for what we think, like in the FFPC tournaments, $200, $500K payout. It's an amazing tournament. What I think the field's going to do. So you can go check it out there.
Rich?
I just drew the first pick in a playoff league, Daigle, and I was thinking about taking Tom Brady. How wrong am I?
No, Tom Brady's awesome. I have him ranked over Josh Allen, unlike others, because, again, I'm really worried about this Bills matchup. And you don't want to be left holding the bag in these leagues. Like, you need multiple entries, honestly, if you're taking Josh Allen, because, like, you can get away with Devin Singletary being one and done, but Allen's going to be the highest roster quarterback. And so if you're one and done there, your lineup's just cooked.
All right, yeah, I was thinking about taking Brady, feeling like, you get the
Brady.
first round matchup and you get that second round matchup and you just hope they can win in the NFC Championship game, maybe.
Bucks Packers. Let's get there and see what happens. Let's flip a coin.
All right. I mean, other than that, like, I don't really care where you can find me. I want to
it's wild card weekend, whatever we're at. Just find me somewhere.
You want to be left alone
man,
for the next 3 months or whatever it is. Just let me do my thing. Let me catch up on the DVR.
You'll be on the couch. Find me on the couch in a week.
I mean, I see all these people like posting like all the stuff about like off-season takes and stuff, and I dropped a little off-season take earlier this week just because it threw on something I was working on, but like I need to decompress. Let me decompress first and get through this.
I've said that on I think every show this week, Rich. That I get on there to like I'm glad y'all are already starting 2022 takes, but don't look for me for another couple weeks. I'm gonna be hiding.
That was
but all these. I did write up all 6 games at Sharp Football Analysis. They're free. They're not paywall, so you can go check all that stuff out.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's worth checking out for sure.
You didn't lead with that. You led with "You'll find me somewhere."
You put a lot of work into it, I'm sure.
I know.
That's Rich Hribar from Sharp Football Analysis, or his couch. John Daigle, NBC Sports, a Good Football Show podcast. Also decompressing for the next couple of weeks. Well, no, not just yet. We'll be back next week for sure. One more week of this show. There you go. This is the second to last show for the season. This was the Super Wild Card Weekend show. That was Rich. That was John. That was producer Devin. That was football. I was Dean. We're out of here. Holler.